George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
So it was Huey Edwards on the news, but it was only a midlife crisis. You know, the kind everybody has. Makes you wonder if he's been suffering from serious mental health problems for years, as his own wife says in her statement this evening, why the BBC were using him to front the main BBC News all of those years when he was, I don't know how to put it, mentally ill. Perhaps we all deserve it. Zelensky is left adrift, hanging out to dry. Didn't he look furious? He is not getting in NATO, neither is there a timetable for him to get into NATO. In fact, the die was cast today in Vilnius, and Ukraine, I can safely say, will never be in NATO, neither one part of it or all of it. And in the war itself, the Russian armed forces have gone on the offensive, have broken through Ukrainian lines, and are heading fast for Kupiansk, that place I keep talking about. 17 years ago this day, I had my greatest ever TV victory. It's too long to show on the show. It would be too self-indulgent, but you can see it on Twitter and on my social media platforms. And we're talking to the greatest pranksters in recorded human history. And that is not a prank. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night, as Betty Davis once said. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Huey Edwards isn't on the news, but he's in the news. He's not on the news because he's in a hospital. In a hospital, presumably specializing in mental health issues, because his own wife issued a statement late this afternoon naming her husband as the mysterious hitherto BBC personality central to BBC output, who is alleged to have paid £35,000 to a 17-year-old crack addict in exchange for lewd pictures. It appears that the whole thing was a midlife crisis, although his wife said he's been mentally ill for years, which, as I said, is passing strange, as the BBC have been using him for all of those years as their principal mouthpiece for British state propaganda. Now, I feel sympathy for anybody with mental health issues. It can happen to anyone. It happened to Philip Schofield, the ITV personality. He had mental health issues also, but only once he'd been found out for the rakish, reprobate life that he had been leading. Let me put one thing very firmly on the table. It's okay to be gay. Many of my friends are gay. I have been a champion of gay and lesbian rights all of my political life, long before it became vogue, long before it became a twibbon, long before the arms manufacturers started to put rainbows on their missiles and bombs. But it's not okay to be married and have children and lie to your wife and those children about a second life, a double life, on gay dating apps, because you're not brave when you are finally unmasked or come out just before you're unmasked. You're a coward, a liar, a cheat, and a deceiver. And that's what Philip Schofield was And it may turn out that's what Hugh Edwards was also. It's possible that the balance of his mind was affected, but it's unlikely to have been affected to the extent that he merely imagined he should be putting his details on a gay dating site, meeting teenage schoolboys, even if they are over the age of consent, for illicit purposes, and then going home to Mrs. Edwards and pretending that nothing happened. But beyond that, I care about for every other person in Great Britain for a TV license for a state broadcaster that turns out to be a nest, not just of liberal fanatics in the grip of every Islamist known to man, woman, stroke, other, but is a veritable nest of perverts, of people involved in the most murky and sordid, funded by me and by you. Sir, that's what he was called, Jimmy Savile, was paid millions of pounds by you, and Hugh Edwards was earning £640,000 every single year for reading an auto cue of British state propaganda. That money was yours. That money was mine. 35,000 of it, mind you, was recycled, trickled down, you might call it, though that metaphor may be verging on the obscene. These people in the BBC don't just think they're better than us. Don't just think that we are less than them. Every day, it seems, even on company property, certainly on company money, your money, my money, they are engaged in the kind of behaviors which have dragged our country into the mire. A mire in which the BBC then gleefully wallows, indeed frolics, dances, TikToks around. Well, the BBC doesn't speak for me, even though I'll go to prison if I stop paying them to pretend to do so. It is now an unstoppable demand that the British people must no longer be forced to pay for this sordid apology for a television broadcaster that the BBC has become. Defund the BBC, abolish the license fee, and enough now about Hugh Edwards, his mental health, and his dirty habits. Let me turn to much more important issues. Vladimir or Vladimir or Mr. Zelensky, sometimes President Zelensky, it depends which part of Joe Biden's 60 seconds you're referring to. In fact, if the brain boxes behind the glass here have got that, let's take a quick look at some of Joe Biden's latest finest.
Vladimir and I shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelensky and I, Vladimir and I shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelensky and I
shouldn't be so familiar. Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky should have consulted the history books to read what happens to American puppets when America has no further use for them. They could have consulted the record of what happened to the once mighty Shah, forced to wander the earth like a ghost ship when the United States abandoned him in 1979 upon the success of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Or, gone back further, could have looked at the Diem brothers in South Vietnam. They ended up actually dead full of lead. He could have looked at the latest example, the what's-his-name last president of American and UK-controlled Afghanistan. What was his name again? Sure, he made it out with a lot of money bags, but nobody remembers his name, nobody mentions him, nobody laments him. He is a non-person for the people whose puppet he was. Zelensky will go the same way if he gets out alive. If he gets out alive to one of his waterfront properties in multiple countries across the globe, he might regard it as something of a personal success. Unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of his compatriots had to leave their guts on the ground, on the steppe, on the Ukrainian battlefield in order for Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky to momentarily be important in the world, but he sure wasn't important in Vilnius. The pictures tell the story. They tell far more than 1,000 words. Zelensky had gone there, demanding either membership of NATO right now or a clear path and a timetable for Ukrainian entry into NATO, neither of which was forthcoming. Moreover, the worm has begun to turn. Little benwallace, too cowardly to roar like the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz, too cowardly to roar at anybody except someone who he knows will not, for the moment at least, strike him back, unleashed a torrent of abuse against Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky. He said that Britain and the West were not Amazon, and that gratitude from Ukraine was necessary to be shown in order to keep the Western public on side. We are not Amazon, he said. No, you're right. Nothing that you supply, Mr. Wallace, is remotely as good as anything you'll get pretty damn quickly from Amazon. Amazon's things work. If they don't, you get your money back or the product replaced. Your things don't work and are very quickly indeed destroyed. We are not Amazon. You should say thank you, said little Ben Wallace. And all of the Western media is this evening echoing that same thing, that the Ukrainians should cool down, that Zelensky should cool down his criticism of what they call the alliance, an alliance which actually suffered a double blow today. Not only did they betray Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky, they pulled out of their real estate deal in Tokyo, Japan. You'll remember, I told you, they were going to open a NATO East, a NATO Tokyo, NATO Japan. France objected. The idea has been dropped unceremoniously in the summit of NATO today. But as I said, Wallace is demanding some gratitude from the Ukrainians. But in fact, it should be the other way around. The Ukrainians were asked, told, pushed, cajoled, encouraged, armed, propagandized for by NATO, not the other way around. This war was created by NATO. The Ukrainians are merely the poor bloody infantry sent to die or be maimed or be paralyzed forever or be mentally damaged forever on behalf of NATO, not the other way around. There's no gratitude required from Ukraine to you, Mr. Wallace. It is you who pushed these people into this now simply impossible position. As I said earlier, the Russians are now, as of this evening, on a major offensive. They have broken through the Ukrainian lines, those lines that were supposed to be the springboard for the spring, then summer counter-offensive. Well, the counter-offensive is right now being countered. The lines are being overrun, and the pincer is moving fast towards that famed, fabled city of Kupiansk, about which I often speak, which is under heavy artillery bombardment right now as I speak this minute. This war is going to be over much quicker than you thought, because this is a pivotal moment, a hinge moment, a moment at which NATO blinked. They will not enter the war. They won't even discuss any Ukrainian entity joining NATO until the war is over. And that makes clear what the basis of this war being over will look like. I tweeted it out earlier today in more detail. But in truth, Ukraine is no more as a state that we knew and recognized, albeit for a very brief historical period of time. There will now be two Ukraines. There will be a Russian Ukraine, which will take the entire seaboard, including the great Russian city of Odessa, leaving so everything east of the Dnipro and south to the seaboard will be Russian Ukraine. Then there will be what we might call, for the purposes of argument, a Western Ukraine. Although that Western Ukraine will be subject to both Polish and Hungarian revanchist ambitions, who consider part of that West Ukrainian territory to be their own, and they will seek to recover them. I myself will oppose any such effort. But the regime in Kiev will have to change. No end to this war is possible with Zelensky still in power, with Budyanov still in charge of the intelligence, with the missing head of the armed forces of Ukraine, Zaluzhny, still in charge. These things will not be able to bring the war to an end. So a regime change in Western Ukraine will have to happen. And that new regime will have to cast iron guarantee that the Western Ukrainian entity will never join the European Union, will never join NATO, and more importantly, that neither the European Union nor NATO will ever be in Western Ukraine. Not a single footprint of either of these entities will ever be in Western Ukraine. In short, Western Ukraine will become the new East Germany, a buffer between Russia and the hostile powers of Germany, Poland, and the rest of NATO to a variety of degrees. That end is coming sooner than you think. It is the only possible end now. And now that we know that NATO will not be entering the war and Ukraine will not be entering NATO, that's the reason for the counteroffensive tonight, and that's the reason for its apparent success in just the last few hours. We'll be talking to two of the great heroes of contemporary journalism. They probably don't see themselves that way, but they have prank called the very worst people in the entire world and shown them to be the fools that they are. Stay tuned for Vovan and Lexus. You ain't seen nothing like it yet. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racists. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiot isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we've got a poll running. Is it right to name the BBC presenter being investigated? You can vote on my Telegram, Twitter, YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. It's pretty overwhelming, actually. 81%, 73%, 83%, 81% say yes, it was right to do so. 12,270 people have voted so far. So let me know if you agree. Get your vote in before the end of the show. Now, having an Asian wife and 3 half-Asian children, what happens to Asians in America is obviously of great importance to me. I therefore sat down to hear a paean of praise from President Biden to some Asian American women. Here's what happened.
Included groundbreaking Asian Americans like Vera Wang and Joan Shingang, I'm going to pronounce right, Shanga Kawawa. Included groundbreaking Asian Americans like Vera Wang and Joan Shingang, I'm going to pronounce right, Shanga Kawawa.
Not only is that priceless, it's worth watching twice or 202 times, but here's something that has increasingly dawned on me. Why does the White House keep putting him up for this kind of thing? For a start, why does he have to be on TV every day when every time he goes on TV, he demonstrates not senility, but actually unhinged mental health issues? Why do it to an old fool like him? But if you're going to do it, why ask Joe Biden, who you wouldn't send out for a loaf, to pronounce Chinese names on television, Asian names? He can hardly bite his own fingernails. And you're asking him to talk about Joan Wakarukurukawawa? Are you serious? Maybe they are setting him up for the mental health card. You know, like Schofield, Huey Edwards in the news. Maybe. That's what it is all about. I can no longer pronounce the names of great Asian American women, so I'm going to step down and not contest the next presidential election. What do you think? Let me know. So the poll is there. Here's the numbers to call if you're in the UK or Ireland. It's 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Now, anyone who can successfully prank little Ben Wallace and Henry Kissinger, not to mention a whole long list of the worst people in the world, and get them to speak honestly in a way that they would not do if they didn't think they were speaking, usually, to President Vladimir Zelensky, Mr. Zelensky. It is astounding that Western countries' leaders are giving hundreds of billions of dollars to Vladimir Mr. Zelensky, but they don't even know if they really are speaking to him on the phone. They take it on trust that they are. They don't recognize his voice. They've never heard of FaceTime. They don't know that you need to take precautions when Vovan and Lexus are around. I'm glad to say they'll never try and prank me because I'm on the same side as them. Gentlemen, thank you for joining on this historic occasion. The mother of all talk shows. So good to see. Hello, Vovan. I don't know if we've lost Lexus or he's not joining us or what. But let me ask you, first of all, how did you manage to prank a fool like benwallace?
Это была достаточно длинная цепочка.
It was a quite long chain.
Нам сначала удалось поймать министра внутренних дел Великобритании Прити Паттл. Она пообщалась с нами, когда думала, что говорит с премьер-министром Украины.
First, we managed to prank Priti Patel, our Home Secretary. She thought that she was talking to the Prime Minister of Ukraine.
И после этого нашего разговора она до конца была уверена, что говорит с украинцем, и мы попросили ее официально пригласить Бена Уоллеса. То есть письмо, чтобы пригласить Бена Уоллеса, направила как раз Прити Паттл, и она для нас организовала этот пранк.
And actually, until the end of the conversation, she believed that she was talking to a Ukrainian, and we asked her to officially invite Ben Wallace. So it means that she actually was the one who officially invited him.
I see. Now look, do these people not take precautions? I mean, if you phoned me saying you were Vladimir, Mr. Zelensky, first of all, I'd ask for your number so I could ring you back. I'd make a FaceTime call or a Zoom call. I'd take precautions. Do none of these people take precautions?
Не все, бывает, работают непрофессионалы, к сожалению, и на этом мы их ловим. Команда, которая хочет тоже попиариться на этой истории и для себя какую-то получить выгоду от этого разговора. Поэтому они не проверяют, кто им звонит. Такое бывает часто.
Not all of them take precautions, and usually we prank the non-professionals who would miss the shot. And there might be some people who would like to get some publicity or some hype, and they would be the ones who never check whether the phone number is authentic.
И мы работаем довольно профессионально, потому что мы давно этим занимаемся.
But we are real professionals because we are quite old in that game.
Oh, you definitely are, no doubt about that. But these fools, these unprofessional people, are the people in charge of the foreign affairs and military affairs of Western countries. It's quite telling that fools are running our countries, isn't it?
Что он сказал?
Он сказал, что эти люди, вот непрофессионалы, они отвечают за внешнюю политику, отвечают за военные вопросы. И получается, что нашей страной, западными странами управляют дураки.
К сожалению, мы сейчас видим, что на Западе политики становятся однодневками. То есть приходит один премьер, один министр, и он сразу сваливает вину на предыдущего, на всю ситуацию в стране, что случилось. И происходит постоянно вот эта чехарда. Нет уже сильных политиков, к сожалению.
Unfortunately, we see that in the Western countries, the so-called fly-by-night politicians. So people who seize the power and immediately they would shift the blame onto their predecessors. So then there are strong politicians in the West.
Now, of course, the fact that they don't know that they're speaking to a Russian rather than a Ukrainian rather makes President Putin's point that the Russian and Ukrainian people are one people, doesn't it?
Да, так и есть, поэтому не надо изображать какой-то акцент, и никто не видит отличия украинского языка от русского. Для них это одинаково, они даже не прислушиваются.
Oh, that's why, actually. It doesn't make sense to pretend you have an accent speaking Russian or Ukrainian, so people never tell one from another.
Now, of course, one of the beauties of your style of journalism, for that is what it is that they tell you the truth that they don't tell us. So, for example, your most recent, I think yesterday, you pranked the most wicked and evil man still alive in the world today. A man with the blood of tens of millions of people dripping from his hands. The demonic Henry Kissinger. And he was quite candid in what he was prepared to tell you, wasn't he?
Да, так и есть. И здесь тоже была такая цепочка, потому что нам удалось вытащить в Zoom Генри Киссинджера, и нам помог в этом Жак Аттали, наша предыдущая жертва пранка. Он думает, что помогал Зеленскому, и поэтому он пригласил Киссинджера как раз поговорить с Зеленским приватно.
Actually, we were again helped by the whole chain of the events, because Henry Kissinger, we managed to invite him because of Jacques Alley, who thought that he was helping Mr. Zelensky. So, and that's how we managed to prank Henry Kissinger.
Жак Аттали.
Jacques Attali.
What's your favorite prank? Vovan, what's your favorite prank?
У нас их огромное количество, и в том числе как раз в Великобритании тоже Борис Джонсон был в 2018 году. То есть для нас это уже как-то мы не говорим, не оцениваем для нас. Наверное, оценивает больше аудитория. Кому-то нравятся политики, кому-то нравятся звезды голливудские. Поэтому мы все, нам нравятся все наши жертвы, наши спикеры, и мы получаем огромное удовольствие. Как для нас это словно хороший журналист, профессиональный, сделал отличную работу и сделал прекрасное интервью.
Oh, actually, we have lots of pranks, and for instance, we even pranked Boris Johnson from Britain in 2018, but we don't have any rankings. We love all of our series, all of our episodes. This is up to the audience to judge. Some of them like when we prank politicians, others like when we prank Hollywood stars. But we love all our victims, or rather our speakers, and we enjoy our job, just like a professional reporter enjoys if he does a good piece of journalism.
Well, you've had a lot of front page splashes, that's for sure. I think Lexus is joining us, is he? Lexus, if you're there and you can hear me, we can't see you yet, but feel free to chip in. Because I was going to make the point to you both. We used to have vaguely similar, though much more malicious, journalists in this country. We called him the fake sheikh. He used to dress up as an Arab sheikh, and he hoodwinked celebrity after celebrity after celebrity. And after each one, I used to think to myself, that must be his last one, because nobody is going to fall for that one again. They're bound to finally realize that if someone comes up to you dressed as an Arab sheikh, he's up to no good. But your hits keep on coming. It seems it's like taking candy from a baby.
Переведи, что он хочет.
Он просто хочет это самое прокомментировали, чтобы вы... то есть вот у них на британском телевидении были так называемые вот фальшивые шейхи такие. И то есть каждый раз это было как-то глупо и не смешно. И, в общем, все равно, что отнять конфету у ребенка получается. И вот он думал, что каждый вот подобный пранк будет последним. Вот. Но вот за разом люди как-то ведутся на это все.
Мы тоже до сих пор удивляемся, почему политики, звезды ведутся на это, но мы тоже работаем довольно сложными схемами, сложными историями. Для нас главное заинтересовать собеседника, чтобы он считал, что для него этот разговор, который мы запрашиваем, будет выгоден с тем или иным политикам, чтобы он уверен был, что получит тоже какой-то политический себе бонус, какой-то хайп. И поэтому мы используем тех или иных спикеров, которые актуальны в данный момент времени, которые стоят на слуху, которых рекламирует западная пресса, и политик, соответственно, думает, что если поговорю с с этим человеком, допустим, сегодня это Зеленский, то, значит, это прибавит мне каких-то рейтингов. Вот ловим мы как раз политиков на вот этом, на их как раз желании попиариться и получить что-то тоже от этого разговора.
We also are surprised by the fact that the politicians and other stars are getting pranked, are so credulous, so to say. But usually we try to get people interested in what we're telling them so that they would think that they could benefit from that conversation, that they would get some bonuses or get some hype. And usually the speakers that we choose, they are the ones who have been, or we pretend to be, actually are the ones who are most popular in the West. And today, for instance, that's Zelensky. And so these politicians, our victims, so to say, they believe that talking to that person, their rating would go up. So we usually hook them by that.
Yeah, quite obviously. How do you monetize this skill? I mean, have you got a place where you reveal these pranks first that people can follow? Not that we in the West are allowed to give you anything because, of course, there is now an iron curtain which we have erected between the West and the East. So we can't buy anything from you. But does anyone buy anything from you? Have you got an outfit that monetizes this brilliant work?
Как вы монетизируете ваши пранки? Как монетизируете ваши пранки? То есть они не могут, к сожалению, ничего у вас купить, потому что такой буквально железный занавес между Западом и Востоком. Вот. Но, может быть, кто-то вас покупает, то есть кому-то вы предоставляете право такой первой ночи.
Понял. Самое интересное, что в 2020 году как раз мы сотрудничали с британской прессой, и мы продали эксклюзивом пранк с принцем Гарри, потом с Билли Айлиш и с вице-президентом США Камалой Харрис. А сейчас мы работаем в том числе, у нас есть свое шоу на российском видеохостинге RTube, потому что с YouTube нас удалили. И как раз из-за пранка с Беном Уоллесом он написал письмо в YouTube, и из-за этого полностью удалили наш канал как угрозу национальной безопасности. Вот. Мы зарабатываем на своем шоу, плюс у нас есть различные, мы своего рода селебритис в России, ездим также, встречаемся с людьми, даем мастер-классы, рассказываем о своей деятельности и, в принципе, получаем с этого гонорары.
Actually, in 2020, we cooperated, so to say, with the British media, and we sold to them our exclusive rights for some of the episodes with Prince Harry, with Kamala Harris, and Billie Eilish. And actually, we have our show running in Russia, and we had our YouTube channel removed or cancelled because Ben Wallace wrote a letter to the administration of YouTube saying that our episodes pose a security threat. And since then, actually, we have a lot of masterclasses. We tour around Russia and we charge some fee for that.
Good. Well, more power to your elbow. There's a fool born every minute, we say here, and long may you prank them. Lexus, if you can hear me, I wanted to just ask this difficult question. The biter bit. Has anyone ever pranked you?
I don't see a reason to do that because we are not officials. We are just private persons, and I don't see us as celebrities. And so I think that we are not so interesting for other pranksters. But if someone could do that, we will be really interested. If it will be really funny and professional.
Yes, funny and revealing. I asked Vovan, but he didn't have a favorite. Have you got a favorite prank that you participated in? One that you thought was the state of the art?
Well, it depends on our listeners. So we don't have our favorite prank because every prank has its own history and its own legends with that we have used. But I think that one of the greatest our prank calls were probably the pranks with historical persons, including George Bush W. and Henry Kissinger, and many other politicians who made a great contribution in world history. And of course, that is really interesting to us, and it's really a great honor to talk to such people. And of course, for me, as I'm a biggest fan of British rock and roll, I think that's one of my personal favorite pranks were pranks with Brian May and with Elton John.
You pranked Elton John. I didn't know that. Who did he think you were? Zelensky?
Yeah. Yeah, we pranked him as a president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and we called him in 2016, and we said that President Putin would like to talk to him and meet him personally. So that was his dream, and he said that it was a miracle for me. So it's the greatest phone call for me, and he was really glad to hear it. And we promised him to arrange a gay parade in Moscow, and he believed. And then he posted that information on his Instagram. And after that, press secretary of Vladimir Putin said that the conversation wasn't. The conversation did not happen, and then Elton John said that the prank was funny, but the situation around gay rights in Russia is not funny. And then real Putin decided to call him personally and say that so don't think don't be offended of that guys. So just take it easy.
Well, it's kind of put my opinion of Elton John up. I don't know about anyone else. Now, we mentioned Kissinger a couple of times. I was surprised by his answer to your question, who blew up the Nord Stream? He paused for quite some time and answered, I thought you did, which would be revealing in itself, but not accurate. If Seymour Hersh is to be believed, the answer is the Americans did it, not that Zelensky did it. Were you surprised at that answer?
Of course, we were surprised, but we were not surprised of methods that Ukrainian authorities use to make any harm to Russia. But he said that it was you, but he didn't say who was the real organizer of that terror, because that it could be the United States, but who was the real executor? I don't think that Ukraine could not do such a sabotage. So anything could happen, and I think that Ukraine could be a real executor of such a thing.
Now, the 100-year-old Henry Kissinger, is he still compos mentis? Did he make sense when you were talking to him? Is it worth my trying to interview him myself, not to prank him, but to interview him?
I think that he is still a real diplomat, and he still has great experience, and he is one of the smartest person in the world. Even he is 100 years old, but he still has great points of view, because he made great combinations in world diplomacy. And so for us, I think that he is a more smart person than current president of the US. So I think so, because he still, we had asked him what gives you your energy? And he said that I'm still involved in the world's processes, so it gives me just something like impulse to manage many processes, and so that's why he still has a great reputation in world diplomacy.
Well, look, Vovan and Lexus, can I secure a promise from you that you'll never try to prank me?
No, just to give you an interview. So I think it's
Ну,
better.
мы не можем обещать, если вы вдруг станете в Британии.
We cannot promise that in case you become the British Prime Minister.
If I become the British Prime Minister, Britain will be a part of the Russian Federation. So it's not that likely either way. Thank you very much, Vovan and Lexus, legendary Russian comedians and pranksters. And long may you continue to fool the fools that govern our countries. Much obliged to you for coming on the show. Sorry for any technical difficulties. Now, 13,000 people have voted in the poll. Was it right to name the BBC presenter being investigated overwhelmingly on all platforms? You say yes. So, another big blunder by the BBC to try and cover this up. When, of course, if these allegations had been made against anybody else, anybody, Boris Johnson, you think they would have named him? Me? Do you think they would have named me? They would have named anybody. They flew a helicopter at public expense across the house of Cliff Richard, the iconic British peaches and cream crooner, who turned out to be completely blameless. It was a completely fraudulent claim that Cliff Richard had faced. But it didn't stop the BBC outing him at very great public expense. I'll be right back, and then it's your calls all the way to the hour. Stay tuned. On the line is a Rose in Texas. Sounds like the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children in nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Susie in Dunstable on Hughie Edwards on the news. Go ahead, Suze.
Oh, hello, George. Thank you so much for calling me Suze. I love being called Suze. My husband David and I have watched your programme for years, and we love it. Thank you. My questions, I've got one question at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm speaking too quickly.
No, go on. I was just going to talk about Bob Dylan, Suze. Suze Rotolo, his first serious girlfriend, Bob's first serious girlfriend. That's what was in my mind. That picture of Bob Dylan and Suze on the front of Freewheelin', the Freewheelin' album. Anyway, that's a digression. Go ahead.
Thank you, no problem. I've got a few little comments and then I've got a question for you. So it's regarding Hugh or Hughie. So that it seems like the police say what he has done isn't criminal, but for me, I think it's wrong. I think it's an abuse of trust. He has influence and trust over many people. I think that people like him in the BBC or whatever, they need to sign a document like a DBS form to agree that they're not going to abuse that trust. For me, this has to stop. It's been going on. You know, we've got Jimmy Savile, the other guy, the currently what's he called? I can't think of his name. Anyway, and now Hugh Edwards. Anyway, so my question to you, George, can or could or should there be some sort of comeback for this type of abuse of trust?
Well, I think that's quite a long and complicated issue. Let me say that if the police are right, and that no law has been broken, then the matter becomes one between Edwards and his wife, number one, and Edwards and his employer, number two, because, well, let's leave the wife out because that's a matter purely for them. But it with a disreputable individual like that. What do you say? Suze, are you still there? Oh, what a pity. Let's get Suze back if we can. Let's go to Simon in Florida, our legend, to tell us what really happened at NATO. Simon, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Well, I think that the media aren't really giving a very clear idea of what has actually occurred. And I think it's very important for people to realize that not only was there a joint communique issued, which indeed is 90 paragraphs long, some of those paragraphs are a whole page on their own, but there was also a joint declaration issued by the members of the G7. Now, particularly with relation to the communique, when people are judging whether or not they can trust the honesty of these leaders and the validity of this document, I would just read out the first two phrases of the first sentence, and you're going to have to try not to choke on your tongue. It says, "We, the heads of state and government of the North Atlantic Alliance, bound by shared values of individual liberty, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, have gathered in Vilnius as war continues on the European continent." Now, I think a lot of the audience may choose to take issue with one or more of those key concepts which are in the opening sentence of the document. But that issue aside, if you can just hold your stunning riposte, which I'm sure your brain is percolating as we speak, then the really important issue here is that twice within the document, they have called for the unconditional withdrawal of the forces of the Russian Federation from the entirety of the territory of the Republic of Ukraine, including Crimea. Now, I've had a dispute with other analysts as to whether or not unconditional withdrawal is synonymous with unconditional surrender. And I would invite people to look at the commentary on this issue in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt archives that cover the conference that Winston Churchill attended in Casablanca in January of 1943. And I would strongly suggest that given that for Putin to withdraw from Crimea would essentially be a surrender, that the use of that phrase, unconditional withdrawal, is actually in this context synonymous with unconditional surrender. And Roosevelt's insistence upon that term in 1943 is relevant because he used it as a political mechanism to ensure US support for the war, so that people felt that their young men's sacrifices were going to have a worthy goal. And in this case here, I think that President Biden has done the reverse, and he's used the term withdrawal rather than surrender to mislead the American people in the run-up to next year's presidential election as to what the American administration's true goals are. But for the people of Britain, what's particularly important is what your Prime Minister Sunak has put his name to, which is the Joint Declaration, which is actually a framework convention that I believe is going to become a litmus test for all of the countries of the world that wish to have dealings with the members and the leaders of the G7 and NATO to actually add their names to that document that the Japanese Prime Minister and President Biden have declared to be open to every country to step up and sign in order to make their equivalent of the Ukrainian pledge.
The Ukrainian pledge. Call it withdrawal, call it surrender. It isn't going to happen, whatever you call it. That's the truth of the matter, isn't it, Simon? The opposite is going to happen. The forces of the Kiev regime are this evening on one part of the front on the point of collapse. And that's only going to increase as a trend over these next months. After all, we now know that NATO will not enter the war. And therefore, the Russian forces can push forward regardless. And the Ukrainian fighters, who I must say have fought well and bravely for more than 500 days, are bound to say to themselves, well, what is it's that old one, who wants to be the last one to die in the war? What is the point now of risking my own death when we have been effectively abandoned by the NATO powers, in the sense that whilst they're prepared to give us guns and machinery that we can't operate, they're not prepared to risk the life of a single Pomeranian grenadier. Over to you, Simon.
Well, I think that your analysis is exactly correct there, Mr. Galloway. And the real crux of it is that if the Russian authorities, completely independently, come to the same conclusion as my analysis, then they are now faced with having to make a fairly urgent decision. Are we going to surrender, or are we going to total war? Because NATO have made it very clear that there is no middle ground.
There is no middle ground. I tweeted thoughtfully, I hope, earlier this evening, not that long ago, the last couple of hours, in which I set out the basis on which I thought this war would now end. And I I don't resile from a word of that, despite anything I've learned over the last couple of hours. There's an attempt to spin the betrayal of Zelensky, but the truth of what happened to Zelensky today is there, etched in every line on his face, to coin a phrase. I'll be right back after the break with more calls, but with the coolest cat in Washington, Garland NIxon. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. This type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
We'll get back to Susie in Dunstable later, but here's the numbers to call if you want to join the show. UK and Ireland, 08081965522. US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. Free in both cases. And the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. There's an email. George, do you think any of the representatives of NATO at the summit actually spoke out today, suggesting that the funding of civilian deaths is no longer ethical? I know Hungary are for peace talks, but I'm interested to know your opinion on whether you think any other nations may have spoken out over the last couple of days. Kind regards from Ben. Our email address is onair@moats.tv. As far as I know, certainly in the public sphere, Hungary is the only EU country which is calling for an end to the war and pushing the case for peace. Turkey is today, but not yesterday, and maybe not again tomorrow, amongst the NATO powers. But for the rest, they are all, locked in to the road that leads, according to Medvedev, the former president of Russia, not just to war, but beyond war. Let's hear what the most perspicacious correspondent on the Potomac, Garland NIxon, thinks about any and all of that. Garland, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to see you. Before we turn to the war, I can't not ask you about Joe Biden. I just played a couple of the highlights. His bemused inspection of the guard at the Royal Palace when he was briefly here will live long in the memories, not least of the soldiers he was inspecting, who must at any moment have imagined they would have to pick him up off the ground. It was odd because he made King Charles look like he was also an octogenarian out for a stroll under the supervision of Nurse Ratched, and a splendid pair they made. And then there was the fool that asked him to pronounce long and difficult Asian American names. Is it reaching breaking point is what I'm asking?
Yes, it is reaching breaking point. The discussion here in the United States regarding the 2024 election is now who will be the Democratic nominee. In a lot of circles, the discussion about Joe Biden is that they're hiding him right now. Of course, they hid him in 2020, but he seems to have fallen a step below cognitively where he was even then. So I think the thing that's spoken quietly in the corners of Washington, D.C. is that we're not going to be able to hide Joe Biden through this 2024 election, and some maneuver is going to have to be made to brush him aside, and of course to move Kamala Harris. I mean, it seems to me that Joe Biden's whatever cognitive issue he has seems to be contagious, because Kamala Harris was recently rambling incoherently about AI. Matthew Miller, he's the State Department spokesman, repeatedly was saying that Ukraine has suffered a strategic, disaster. I'm paraphrasing, something down that line. And when they asked him, don't you mean Russia? And he said, yes, Ukraine. So it seems to me that the Biden administration is falling apart at the seams cognitively. But Joe Biden, it's getting obvious to people. Now the discussion is, who are they going to slip in there? And of course, the name that we hear most frequently is Gavin Newsom in California, although he's not terribly popular as a governor in California. And of course, you've got RFK Jr., who is sneaking up in the passing lane.
Yes, maybe we should cut out the middleman and just go straight to AI. Make AI the president of the United States of America. Certainly Kamala doesn't compete with AI. Gavin Newsom is the grand old Duke of Woke. He won't play in Peoria, will he? He scarcely plays in Malibu.
Correct. He's not very popular. He won his last recall election in California only because California is a very blue state, a very Democratic or a Democrat Party oriented state, and he was going against conservatives, a place where he couldn't lose. Of course, he'll win his home state, as any Democrat would, but they need someone who will, in this day and age, cross over to independence. And of course, we're right around 30% Republican, 30% Democrat, and 40% independent in the United States now. So whoever the Democrats come up with, they're going to have to be someone who appeals to independence. Gavin Newsom, I don't believe, is that guy. And I do believe that as Joe Biden falls aside for whatever reason, they're going to have a lot of difficulty with RFK Jr. Right now, there are many people projecting him to win in the first two primaries and have some level of momentum in the primaries. So as I said, I hate to keep bringing up RFK Jr., but in that Joe Biden is in deep and serious trouble. Again, our economy. There was a report that came out. We have an app called Klarna, Klarna, in which people can buy groceries, buy now and pay later. We're using that is increased dramatically. So Bidenomics is not working well for the average working class person. And so there are any number of reasons that Joe Biden is going to have to be cast aside.
I'm a big admirer of the presidential run of RFK Jr. I hope that he has a plan B to run as a third-party independent if and when the Democrat establishment does to him what they did to Bernie Sanders not once but twice. Do you think he might run as a third-party candidate?
I think there are a number of possibilities going on here. Certainly, he was recently asked whether or not he would endorse Joe Biden if he lost, and he said his answer was whether he would commit to endorsing Joe Biden if he were to lose the Democratic nomination, and his answer was, of course not. And he then said that he would, he had a plan to win, and he didn't have a backup plan for losing. There is a former NBA basketball player. This was in the news. A guy named Royce White. He played for the Houston Rockets. Recently, he was playing in another league, and they zeroed in on something that he had written on the side of his bald head, and it was "Protect RFK." And when questioned about that, he said from his perspective, he liked RFK and Trump as a team, but he feared that the deep state could take actions against the health and well-being of RFK Jr., shall we say. So there are people looking at the dynamics of the Democratic Party, understanding as you and I do that they are prone to, such illicit machinations, shall we say, that would stop the democratic process from having its way in the party. And there's questions he may jump over to the Green. Would he jump over to the Green Party with Cornel West? Would he come over and run as a Republican with Trump? There are a number of things going on, and sadly, that conversation has to be had because the history of the Democratic Party tells us that even if he wins by a landslide, they're likely to go in the back room and just hand it to the first neoliberal warmonger that they can get their hands on.
Exactly. I mean, I worry about these things too, and not just for RFK. It seems to me Trump could well, have an unfortunate accident. Also, the two of them together would be literally unstoppable. I don't say it will happen. I don't say even that it should happen. But if it happened, a Trump-Kennedy ticket would literally be unstoppable, wouldn't it?
There's no question. It's game, set, and match. And looking at the U.S. right now, if you look at a Cornel West, who is very popular amongst a lot of people, he's a very well-liked person. If you follow Cornel West, it's hard not to like Cornel West. He's such a kind human being, and his concerns are about the poor and those less fortunate. He's very strong on the Palestinian issue. He's just an all-around good guy. If you look at the people, if you take the number of people who support a Cornel West, an RFK Jr., and Trump, you have an overwhelming majority of the voters. You are correct. So there are a lot of us hoping that something will happen that will cause those who are outside of the neoliberal warmonger mainstream politics in the United States to maybe come together, whether it's form a third party, all run on the same party, whatever the question is, because you are correct. There is victory to be had if we can find a way to bring and I hate to use the word outsiders, because if these are the people that can win in a landslide, they're not the outsiders. The neoconservatives and the neoliberals really are the outsiders.
That's a brilliant point. We should stop thinking of ourselves as the outsiders. It's the people running the show who are actually outside of the majority wishes of the people. They cling to power in one guise of semi-legitimacy or even outright illegitimacy. People like Sunak, for example, never been elected by anybody at all. Macron got 23% of the French public in the first ballot and only won the second ballot because his opponent was Marine Le Pen, the daughter of a Vichy French collaborator, and all that implied. Little soldier Schulz is currently standing on 16% of public opinion in Germany. Even the mad box of frogs Greens are more popular than him, though only just. I could go on. All these people are clinging to power by the skin of their teeth, and we should perhaps show them a little less deference. Big events happened today, Garland, in Vilnius. Let's turn to that, if we may. It was written all over Zelensky's face, wasn't it? It's over. He's been let down, like all these satraps before him. Like the guy that used to run Afghanistan until a year and a bit ago, whose name none of us any longer remember.
Absolutely. And, we've had this discussion in the past, George, that how does this thing end? And my opinion always was it ended just like it ended. If the best that Zelensky could hope for is an ending similar to Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan, where he was, he took off in a plane with $160 million in cash, and there was literally suitcases of money falling out of the plane on the tarmac as he took off. That's the best case scenario for Vladimir Zelensky, for this simple reason. He knows far too much. He needs to be very concerned about his safety, probably far more than RFK Jr., because he knows so much. He can say everything that was said behind the scenes. So as this thing falls apart, the one guy that could really put a hurting on Joe Biden and all of the neocons in Washington, D.C. and in London is Vladimir Zelensky. So I would not want to be in his shoes. And if I were in his shoes, I'd be hiding in a trench somewhere. But yes, it's over. And Joe Biden just said, we're out of ammunition. You're in a war and you're out of ammunition. I think we know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, Chairman Mao was definitely premature back in the 1960s when he called the U.S. a paper tiger. But it wouldn't be premature to say it now. NATO is now a paper tiger, a toothless tiger with no ammunition.
Well, NATO is what's happened here, and it's positive. Certainly, all the deaths and destruction and the danger is not a positive thing. But what is positive that has come of this is NATO has been exposed for what it really is. We were told that NATO is some kind of a military alliance to protect Europe. They conspired, a number of the members of this alliance conspired to attack one of the other members, Germany. They also conspired to hide that attack. They also, and this is what I think is the most telling, they used an exercise in which they were allegedly practicing defending themselves from Russia. They used that exercise literally to hide an attack on one of their members, which was Germany. So NATO is being exposed not just for the military neoliberal fraud it is. And any neoliberal nation or neoliberal group cannot be a military power, because to be a military power requires some level of industrial power, and neoliberal industries are only in business to make money. They make the most expensive weapons they can possibly make, and they don't care if they work. In fact, it's better if they don't work, because then they come back and get the contract for maintenance. So NATO has been exposed. I think it's good for the entire world to see it. And the only question is, as Paul Keating said now, will they continue on? Will they bring that poison? Will they bring that plague to the doorstep of the people in Asia?
It's a powerful point of many powerful points that you make, and I must say it's one I didn't see coming. We are used to the expenditure of vast sums of public money on weapons of war, and we imagine, therefore, that somewhere there will be weapons of war that are worthy of the name, if you like, that can do what it says on the tin. It turns out that the Russian military-industrial complex, which spent a fraction of what the US budget alone is, never mind the budget of all the NATO countries, has vastly outperformed the weapons that our taxpayers paid so dearly for, Garland.
Yes, because what's been exposed here is this is not just an ideal. This is not just a military conflict. This is an ideological conflict. And on one side, you have industrial capitalism, commodity capitalism, which would be Russia and China. And when it comes to the U.S. and Europe, you've got economic capitalism. You've got a type of capitalism that doesn't require you to make anything. So the fact of the matter is, U.S. industries do not make weapons of war. They simply make products that are designed to make a profit. It doesn't matter if it works. It doesn't matter if it's effective. It doesn't matter if you have enough of them. They just simply create a product that they can charge an astronomical amount of money for. And what we find out now is this gigantic budget that the U.S. has for the military, it's all a fraud. The idea is not they have a budget so that they can purchase things that will make them an effective military. It's they have a budget so they can launder the money into their hands of their political and economic cronies. And they've been really good at that. If the judgment is how they're able to money launder, they've been extremely effective. But money laundering does not work very well on the battlefield. So Russia can take literally in some instances, they take old howitzers that they took out of mothballs from World War II. They grease them up and they work. Whereas the stuff that we have now, it costs a lot. It looks great. It has all kinds of computer technology. But when it comes down to it, it's not a weapon of war. It is a very expensive product, nothing more. They could send a picture of a howitzer for what it matters to Lockheed Martin as long as they're getting paid.
A 3D howitzer. Lastly, Garland, I watched the hearings today. The FBI guy, Ray, is it W-R-A-Y?
Yes.
He was literally on the rack. Well, not literally. Metaphorically, he was on the rack. He had no answer to the real forensic harassment of, is it Comey, the lead Republican in the hearings? Comer. It is self-evidently, obviously true that the FBI and the U.S. deep state has been protecting criminal behavior by the Biden family, extortion, and claiming that, well, I haven't looked at that, haven't studied that, haven't read that yet. It's threadbare. The deep state is deeply involved in what looks to me at least, to be a vast criminal enterprise.
There is no question about that. You know, we recently had a lawsuit where a judge in Louisiana found that the Biden administration, the evidence was presented that the people in the Biden administration were having direct contact with Facebook, with Twitter. They were threatening them. As you and I both know, we were affected on Twitter. They were threatening them. They were telling them specific accounts, specific posts they had to take off. So the Biden administration was literally managing social media, which is a direct violation of our First Amendment, our constitutional right to free speech. So a judge has recently found that. We get Christopher Wray today, who's being investigated, refusing to answer how many FBI operatives were involved in the January 6th protests. They won't talk about it. They won't tell how many people. For all we know, there could have been all of them. We don't know, but they won't talk about it. They are in deep and serious trouble, which is another important factor to take into account moving into the 2024 election, because the deep state cannot afford to have a president come into office that may actually bring in people who would look into what they do, what they're doing. So they're going to have to do everything they can to try to affect the 2024 election.
With the buffalo hat on looked suspicious to me, I must say. Garland NIxon, as always, a pleasure to we are led by a conspiracy of liars and killers who are ready to kill every last Ukrainian as long as they can keep the Russian war machine occupied and learn from it, sell weapons to their own side, and bring about the destruction of the European Union's own economy. This means we're led by criminals, not fools, but criminals, who know the truth but tell the lies. who are ready to see significant numbers of people die for their lies. Now, this has been true before. It was obviously true in the Iraq War, but it has not been true on such a systematic, concerted basis as we are now experiencing. The man who said it best said it to the largest television audience ever known on Twitter. Tucker Carlson, which was the biggest audience on Fox News by a country mile, would have spoken it to 3.5 million people on an ordinary weekday. Instead, he spoke it on Elon Musk's Twitter, not sponsored by Pfizer or Big Pharma or the military-industrial complex, not sponsored by any commercial entity. Just Tucker Carlson speaking directly to camera. That's the future of television. Directly, online, like this, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble, on Instagram. Everywhere you can get it is the future of television. Elon Musk paid a lot of money for Twitter, but he has repaid, at least in part, any debt that he had to the rest of us by putting Tucker Carlson in front of what will turn out to be, I hazard a guess, in excess of 100 million people. And he spoke some very important truths. So when you're finished watching the mother of all talk shows, if you have not yet done so, you have to watch Tucker Carlson on Twitter. But stay here meantime, because we've got some cracking guests and, of course, your phone calls.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now listen, Elon Musk, we're paying top dollar to you for your Starlink, and that is twice in the course of one show. You have rudely interrupted me by the fault in your Starlink performance. I'll be on tomorrow on the phone to get this sorted out. Is it right to name the BBC presenter Hugh Edwards? Answers overwhelmingly yes. 81, 73, 83, 82. And that's 14,500 of you have responded. Now, Timothy asked in an email, do I think the US will have fair elections in 2024? I don't know if they'll be fair, Timothy. I don't believe that they ever are fair. But I don't think that the United States can cancel presidential elections in any circumstances. And they will be risking a very great deal indeed if they did. Phone numbers 08081 965522 in the UK and Ireland. In the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. In the rest of the world, 44 203 966 2625. Now, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, I will be speaking and chairing the latest No to NATO, No to War public meeting. The last one was viewed by 500,000 people, making it the biggest anti-war rally, albeit virtual, since 2003 itself. His Excellency Peter Ford, former British ambassador, is one of our main speakers. George Samueli, regular guest here on the show, professor in Budapest. David Clues from Unity Network News, and of course yours truly. I'll open the meeting with an opening statement, and then I'll introduce the other speakers. 7 o'clock, all my platforms. Do join us, either live or on catch-up. Now, I was having a very interesting discussion with Susie in Dunstable, who's back. Suze, sorry we were cut off. Turns out it was Elon Musk's fault. I'm hoping that you heard my answer, and if you did, please feel free to comment on it.
Sadly, I didn't hear your answer because I was in the kitchen and I didn't want any feedback to appear on your program.
How very kind.
So I will catch that, but it doesn't matter. I will listen to your answer.
Yeah.
But I've got another little thought. So to me, what he is about morals, and I think what he has done is immoral. And I don't know what we can do about this. I don't think being immoral is a crime, but it's wrong, and it's a shame that their standards are dropping, I think. But I would like to. I will listen to your answer, and when I'll replay the program. But I would like to say, I wish you could be our Prime Minister.
How very kind. Thank you, Susie, and for a wonderful call. Two calls. Let me respond. There is a difference between things that are immoral and things that are illegal. And it depends what you do in life as to whether that immoral behavior ought to cost you your job. So, for example, God forbid, if a priest was behaving in an immoral way, they would not be breaking the law, but they would be breaking the morals of the church and could not possibly continue in holy orders. I always make the point also, there's a difference between embarrassment and shame. And I illustrate it this way. If someone caught me having sex with my wife, I'd be embarrassed. If they caught me having sex with someone else's wife, I'd be ashamed. And we ought to know the difference between moral and immoral behavior. And I personally believe that we do. I believe that US did. I'm not his doctor. I don't know how serious his mental illness is, but I make the point he's been presenting the news to us every night over these last 10 years or so. So I'm assuming he wasn't that mentally ill, or the people who put him on the screen have a lot to answer for. But I believe that Hugh Edwards knew that what he was doing was wrong.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I always have been and always will be firmly opposed to any changes in the law to allow assisted dying or assisted suicide. I believe the threat to the dependent, the most vulnerable, the most desperate in our society is simply too great, and therefore assisted dying or legalized assisted suicide must never become law in this country. Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Bravo, I agree entirely, and spoke, I hope powerfully, in Parliament against this euthanasia, legalized murder. I have the most profound feelings of opposition to it, which, as you say, does not mean that the pressures on people who are terminally ill, who have lost hope, are not themselves profound, and that the pressures on people without pay and without any kind of remittance or relief are condemned to years, decades of caring for people who are terminally ill, helpless, hopeless, and so on, that these are not deep, deep mines of anguish and of pain and of doubt. But I have a moral and religious obligation to oppose it. If capitalism was a person and it could kill anyone that it liked, it would kill the one that will never again turn a penny of profit. It's very easy to imagine relatives, even family members, even husbands and wives that would like to see the back of you, either because they think you've suffered long enough or because they'd quite like to see what's in your will and quite like to spend it. I wouldn't trust, and I don't think you should, anybody to decide whether you live or die. As a religious believer, I believe that that is God's job, not yours. This is a subject we'll have to return.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
As I say, how lucky we are to have the audience that we do. 1 million people every week watching all or part of the mother of all talk shows, and most attentive to what they hear, and many of them truly brilliant students. It's quite humbling, actually.
Oh, George, blessings upon your cranium. It's the metamorphosis, man, or metamorphosis, the intimations of immortality experiences. George, I like what you said. I love a lot of things you're saying. You know, your daily communion with God is through your conscience. I wanted to comment on that. That's beautifully said.
Your Socratic method on the On-Air University is very beneficial, and I can only speak personally. I have appreciated, because I had called last time in regard to the general strike, and you helped to really refine my understanding of that from a different point.
The alternative point of view. When I heard that last week, and again today, I had this kind of visceral gut reaction to it. And I know what you mean by that. And, you know, the Moats audience knows what they mean by that, because we're all informed citizens. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. For the masses who don't necessarily follow geopolitics, let's say, they're going to listen to whatever the mainstream media tells them. And for them, anything that's alternative, the automatic kind of reaction is, oh, okay, it's a crackpot view, it's a conspiracy theory, it's an extreme view, when really it's not. It's, let's call it what it is. It's fact-based commentary.
Hello, George. Nice to talk to you. By the way, you deserve every penny you get, because you're the only person who speaks the truth over all the fake news.
I wanted to personally thank you for bringing such great guests that speak about the situation. Also, I have become more aware of people like Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone and others who do update us with the correct information about Syria, and this has just been such a great eye-opener. So thank you.
You are the people who have stuck with this show and transformed it into a truly global university, where it can be said that every month at least 4 million people will watch this show. They're in Greece, they're in Canada, they're in America, they're in England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, they're in New Zealand, they're in Australia, they're in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, they're in Finland. They're all over the world. They're in Africa with a call from Nigeria. This is a truly global phenomenon, and that is down to you.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
In Romania, which is to me. Apparently, I work over the minute or so. Zelensky, you're stuck with great Garland NIxon just a few minutes ago here on the show. He knows he is in the Western world, quite a few in then also. And so the chances of him walking out of this gig alive and well, with the ability to write his memoirs and tell his story, must be very, very slight. Am I able to go to David in Swindon? I'd very much like to. David, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, really, the subject I'd like your point of view on, because I am actually conflicted and confused. So, you know, I need your advice on this. It's really to do with Turkey and Russia and the relationship between them now. Because let me just cite a few examples which are making me confused. The first one is when they released the 5 Azov Brigade people. So that must have annoyed Putin. Secondly, when they're letting Sweden now and Finland into NATO. Yeah, that's the second example. And what do you think about the relationship? Because I looked that Turkey gets 60% of its gas from Russia, and it comes across the Black Sea in a thing called Turk Stream. Do you think Putin is going to take revenge on Turkey?
I don't, but it's an entirely legitimate question, and entirely credible people take the opposite point of view to me on this. And I'll concede there may be an element of wishful thinking on my part, because I want the BRICS, the future, the SCO, I want them to be on a linear path forward. But that isn't always true. For example, India demurring at the idea of a BRICS currency backed by gold. for example. But a lot of these are wheels within wheels, and it's not always immediately clear what they mean. You've heard me say the famous aphorism of the French statesman Talleyrand, when told that an opponent had died, he famously asked, "I wonder what he meant by that." Quite often, there are events and statements made which are sometimes not entirely thought through, sometimes accidental, sometimes a cock-up, sometimes a conspiracy. I believe that Turkey is on a path that it will not turn back from towards more and more integration, collaboration, cooperation with the East. And that will be the path, I believe, that will be best for the Turkish people and best for the rest of us in the world. Not least because all of the hopes that he says he has of, for example, getting into the European Union are just moonshine. There's more chance of me becoming the head of the European Union than Turkey becoming a member of the European Union. The Garden will not allow 80 million Turks to freely move and work and settle in the European Union. That's just not going to happen, not least because of Turkish ambivalence. Is it an Eastern country? Is it a Western country? Of course, geographically, it is both, but politically, it will, I think, be better off heading east, and I believe that it will head east. And also, things are not always what they seem. So, for example, Erdogan appeared to collapse over the issue of Swedish membership of NATO. Except this evening he announces that the Turkish parliament will have to agree to Turkey allowing Sweden to join NATO. And it will not even begin discussing that until October. So, Sweden cannot join NATO until October, and then only if the Turkish parliament votes for it. Now, the Turkish parliament may very well not vote for it. The AKP party is in any case split on it, not least because they keep burning Korans outside the Turkish embassy in Sweden. How much more provocation do you need as a Turkish MP to say, nah, no thanks, I don't think I'll go along with that? So things aren't always what they seem, and also sometimes small concessions are made because big concessions on the other side are about to be made. Now, at this point in time, Putin is scheduled to go to Turkey in August. If he doesn't go, then we can conclude that things are not going well. If he does go, we can conclude that nothing that Erdogan has recently done has put the Russians off, may even have been done with the authorization, cooperation of the Russians. Just stay on point, stay vigilant, and watch and try and understand what is happening and what lies beneath. David, great call. Thanks for that. Simon is in London on HUW. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? You okay?
All good, brother. What would you like to say?
Great. Well, here's my issue with regards to the recent developments in terms of Hugh Edwards and what he's done. In my opinion, the BBC handled this issue even worse than the Jimmy Savile incident. Consider all the suppression that happened during the Savile affair. You know, now just imagine this happened in the modern. One of them got through, you know, and this is industrial scale suppression that happened, you know, and considering what they've done to Hugh Edwards, it clearly demonstrates what they would have done in the modern day, and how the BBC today is irredeemable. Now, just like the minority of the religious leaders in the past used to do, notably in the Catholic Church, but other religions I'm sure were guilty of it as well, they used to give out indulgences to criminals and wealthy people and sinners, if you remember, grant them absolution.
Plenary indulgence, yes.
Yeah, indulgence, absolution, forgive all their sins. You give a bit of money and forgive all their sins effectively. Now, something similar is happening in the modern days. I do blame the woke for this. It's called this mental health sector. And what they do, let's call a spade here. The mental health sector is a multi-billion-dollar industry, you know. However, and of course its goal is to make money. And who better to offset it than celebrities? And modern day, a lot of celebrities have made mistakes, which which if they made in the past, they would have got in trouble for. But now it's a case of if they admit that they've made a mistake and they've got mental health issues, it almost seems the majority of times they're forgiven, you know. Prince Harry's tried it. Even a guy I like, Tyson Fury, has tried the same thing, and people have got away with it, unfortunately, you know. It's become too easy for celebrities to claim that they're suffering from mental health issues, so that they come out and admit their guilt, you know. By suggesting they have mental health issues, publicly acknowledging that mental health is important, they stand a good chance of being redeemed by people. And this is why I think the BBC have handled it far worse, and much more than it's far worse than if a guy like Jimmy Savile was found out today. You know, don't get me wrong, mental health is indeed serious, and it's an issue that needs to be dealt with. You know, however, this is now going even further. We're now giving individuals involved in sexually explicit, possibly even illegal behavior, the chance to get redeemed, you know, simply by claiming they have mental health issues, like Hugh Edwards. And people are saying, except, Simon, he won't be redeemed. You will never see Hugh Edwards on your screen again, unless there are some completely unforeseen developments in this particular case. So I hope he banked a lot of the 600,000 a year we were paying him, because he'll find it difficult to earn again. He will not be redeemed. I suspect he will not be redeemed in his own household. And Schofield has not been redeemed. He'll not be offering to sell you any car or buy you any car again. No one will hire him to be the face and voice of their campaigns again. And he'll not be presenting on mainstream television again. So neither of them, I think, have been or will be redeemed. And there is a difference between illegal behavior and immoral behavior. From what we know, there was no crime committed. Although my editor suggested to me that whilst you can have sex with a 16-year-old, you apparently cannot seek obscene material from them, or send obscene material, or receive obscene material if they're under 17 and a half, which, if you'll forgive the pun, makes the law an ass. You can have sex with someone at 16, but they can't send you a picture of it afterwards if they're not 17 and a half. So I don't know whether any crime has been committed, but sordid and reprehensible behavior undoubtedly has happened if the Sun story is true. And these are words always worth bearing in mind. The Sun story is true, then it is vital that this man is no longer on the public payroll. And I don't think that I'm skeptical about the mental health card, because, as you say, it keeps getting brought out when people keep getting found out. The honest thing for this man, if he discovered his family, that would have been
courageous. As it is, seeking to live a double life, deceive your own wife, I think that that is a coward's way. I can't help it. Perhaps I'm old-fashioned. YouTube comments. Black James says, bringing you what you need to hear, what you do not want to hear. Truly always a pleasure from you. Thank you very kindly and well put. Kiara comes up with Zelensky. Want. But yes, he is a rich man. Rich indeed. Richer than Croesus. Who was Croesus anyway? Sean PB says, I wouldn't let Zelensky in. My okay, back to the lines. Lance is in Canada. Let's hear from him. Lance, always a pleasure. We've just lost Lance. The gremlins or the saboteurs, dare I say it, appear to have made the show very difficult tonight. Difficult for me, but also difficult for everyone who works with me, and difficult for you, the kind and loyal viewers. So my apologies for that, and I'll be on the phone to Mr. Musk in the morning. My final thoughts are these. Agent Zelensky came a cropper in Vilnius. He will never forget the 12th of July. I never forget the 12th of July, but that's for different reasons. If you know, you know. But he'll never forget the 12th of July. It was the day when he discovered that he, just like all these hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, are entirely dispensable. Just like the loyal Afghan forces and Ashraf Ghani, I now recall, the erstwhile president of Afghanistan, were entirely dispensable. Just like the Shah of Persia was dispensable. Just like General Noriega was dispensable. Just like the Diem brothers were dispensable. Everyone who is a puppet of the United States is entirely at risk. As I think Henry Kissinger said, though not to the pranksters, that being America's enemy can be dangerous, but being America's friend can often be fatal. And so it's in danger of turning out for Agent Zelensky. He has served his purpose. It was another fine mess that your leaders have gotten you into. They kept you in Afghanistan for 20 years. They lost the life's blood of thousands of your own young men and women in your armed forces, and they cost your treasury the best part of $1 trillion in a 20-year occupation, which was then ended overnight, putting back in power the people we'd invaded in order to overthrow. This constant cycle of foreign policy disasters by our leaders is now not just of esoteric interest to people interested in international affairs, as was once the case, because the chickens have all come home to roost. The unrest in France, the coming unrest elsewhere, the instability in our political system. We've had 3 prime ministers in a year in Britain. Maybe even 4, I may have lost count. The Dutch Prime Minister, Rutte, good riddance, has gone this week. One government after another in Europe is either unstable, deeply unpopular, or in the process of, or already fallen. The chickens are coming home to roost. Our own economies have been wrecked by leaders acting under orders, wrongly, mistakenly, or just wickedly in foreign policy decisions. The decision to confront Russia with full spectrum sanctions and everything short of direct involvement in a war will turn out to have been the biggest disaster that Western leaders ever made. The biggest. And heaven knows they've made many big disasters before now. And it will turn out to be a turning point. The war reached a turning point this evening. But the bigger picture will reflect. And time will show that I'm right on this, as I was right 17 years ago about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and many other things. The turning point in world events has already occurred. It's like a big oil tanker. It takes a lot of time to turn it around. But once that moment has been established and that momentum has been created, nothing will turn that oil tanker back from its new direction. The future is set. The sun is rising in the east. And if we don't get rid of our leaders soon, the sun will set for us on the west. I'll be back, God willing, on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time with a slightly less technically interrupted edition of the mother of all talk shows. But there'll be great guests, there'll be great calls, and I'll be doing my best to explain the events that are happening all around us. Thank you for watching, persevering with tonight's Mother of All Talk Shows.